Okay.
All right, back once again by popular demand. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Notes from the Aleph. Aleph is a high point from which all things are visible, and from our vantage point, we'll be looking at tabletop role-playing games, their design, and the theory behind those designs. Around here, our motto is to be fair, build up, and have fun. I'm your host, GriffinVarro, joined by our editor, Theta, our local designer, Norman Rafferty, and our good friend and GM, RedRabbit. When it comes to tabletop games, I have 15 years of experience running, playing, and frequently fixing problematic rule sets at the table, pronouns he, him, and they, them. Red.
Okay, I am Red Rabbit. I do professional GMing, and I'm currently running our Wednesday morning game of Ironclaw 2nd Edition. I also run games of Vampire the Masquerade and Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, both of them. I also consider myself a student of narrative and game design.
And Rafferty.
Hello. This is my cat. His name is Zenith. He's neutered, so I don't really know how he identifies. I'm Norman Rafferty, he, him, Sanguine Games. I'm not as interesting as the cat. But I do know slightly more about games. Is that right?
Put the cat on.
My
New
gamer's
fourth member. Give them a camera.
There we go. Well, we already had Red's cat.
I know, yeah. I've got two of them.
I've got to bring the puppy in then. Yeah, I gotta equalize this.
Today's theme is just us showing off our pets. That's what you all
Exactly. This is the pet podcast, everyone. Let's go ahead and get into it. So, I love GMing. I love running games. I love making every little minute detail. I love putting it all together and putting it into motion and making sure that I personally know everything about a system so I can just keep things flowing and running smoothly at the table. But it is a lot of work. And when you're not really confident or familiar with the system that you want to run, the task really is an absolute mountain to climb. So it's not really surprising that most people sort of shy away from taking the reins and decide to take up the task of becoming a game master and handling the fun of like 4 other people. There are ways, however, to reduce or spread out this workload to smoothly onboard people into the process of running and even make running the game part of the game itself and not a separate solo task that you personally have to take care of. So today we're going to talk about making running part of the game. So, Rafferty, why don't you go ahead and kick us off? What do you got?
I like rules. I mean,
they're fun.
I'm definitely like, the old school grognard. I love the games with lots of moving parts. I played Rollmaster for fun. No, I've also written more than one how to master a game, or as we like to call it, hosting a game, because that sounds better.
Mm-hmm.
The usual advice I have for GMs is you can get away. All right, each player is going to fixate on what their character's agency is. And most of them are probably only going to learn rules that are relevant to themselves. If they learn any rules at all. Many people won't learn any rules at all. So you as the GM can use that to your benefit, because I always go with the Eliza method. So when a player says, I want to swing from the chandelier, you don't, as a GM, necessarily, a lot of GM books will tell you, well, decide on a skill. No, you don't have to. Flip this around. And as a GM, you can just say, well, what abilities or skills do you have that will let you chandelier? And immediately flip that around to the players. And that's the big advice we always give to GMs. It's like, whenever a player tries to do anything, ask them, okay, how would your character do this? And make them look it up. Make them learn the rules. They'll often give you very silly answers, but I find if you put the responsibility on the players, ask them, okay, what do you have that can do it? Players do like to become engaged in the game, and you ask them what they think. So suddenly go, oh crap, I have to learn the rules. And so that can get the players very engaged in looking at their sheets and deciding what to do, and you can learn more. And that's the knee-jerk advice I have. It's you don't, as the GM, you can ask the players what rules they want to use. You're allowed.
There you go. So that's a good way. Just go ahead and sort of try to offload that onto other people, and it kind of works a good bit. I've definitely gone ahead and a few times said, hey, these are sort of your powers. tell me how they work. Tell me what I'm supposed to be doing with my guys because I need to run them and have them react. This is your show. And I think definitely giving them the spotlight for that definitely kind of helps out a little bit. What do you think, Red?
Well, I'll tell you in this topic, I'm very curious to hear what you guys have to say because I'm someone who
Alright.
needs no. I mean, I'll still vamp. I'll give you my perspective. I'm someone who needs no encouragement to start trying to run a game. The last 3 games that I learned to play while I was running them. So, and I do think you have to be a little bit crazy to attempt that. You also need to have a group of people who are very forgiving or understanding or just eager to play the game, right? I mean, I think it also helps to have people with a lot of familiarity with the system as well. I will say that I think in my position, it pays to not have too much of an ego or be willing to play with people who have more experience than you do. I think you could check out our Wednesday game for a good example of that. Because everybody's just there to have fun. Generally, people are happy that they get to play the game rather than run it, so they're happy to lend you a hand when you need it. But overall, I'd be very curious to see to see systems or game systems. I don't know if you guys have any recommendations, but systems that like try to sweeten the pot for people running, like for people who have to learn the rules.
I do have an example, and it's board games, where there is a small number of them out there where you can have a set of players and then a host position which runs various monsters, encounters, or traps. Descent would very much be this sort of game. And that's a game where you are a player even if you are the one who is running the dungeon. Everyone is kind of like helping with the setup because it's a board game. You put the figures where they're supposed to be that the book says. It's fine. But the GM is someone who's also beholden to a set of rules and are playing their specific game that interacts with the players' games. And they both have some conflicting objective here. And I think that's maybe a good way to maybe like look forward in like how to maybe design towards the future of these things, where you can say, hey, GM, you don't have to do all the work. Here's your position and the things that you're supposed to do. Then maybe say draw from another game where there's a few of them out there where everyone gets together, has their session, and says, like, let's build the world together. Let's build this society together. We were setting up one recently. I think it was Mystic Empyrean.
Yeah.
Where we went ahead and we just build whole societies, worlds, a cosmology, and it's like, hey, cool. The individual GM isn't the person who has to do that. They can focus on playing their side of the game.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because older games used to invite players to do lore. Like it used to be when you sat down to play, if you look at like D&D 1 or D&D 2, you could build a cleric. As a cleric, you must worship a single deity. That's the only choice they present to you, a single deity. Okay.
Yep.
But they don't give you a list. You just make one up, I guess. It's like, so I get to make up my own religion? What?
Yeah.
Like, doesn't that have repercussions that there would be, a whole system and pantheon? Like, if I say I worship Aphrodite, I've just invoked the entire Greco-Roman mythos into the game. And there was a lot of extent to the world building. Well, around D&D 3 and now 4 and 5, they crush that, and they tell you, no, here's the list of deities. Here's Saint Cuthbert and the Raven Queen and all that jazz. Here's what it is. It's weird because like now it's kind of getting away from this whole discussion here. Now they've gotten a lot more presenting like narrowing people's expectation into you will be a player object and don't hope for too much. I mean, a lot of games are like that. And then the GM is expected to run the entire world. There are games, I'll flip this around. Like we just said, Mystic Imperium. There's other games that allow players to build the world together. That they'll have a session 0 where you sit down, you plot out a lot of details and guide that. Like the Wicked Ones game that we were in, we were, we streamed. We were very flexible about that, and letting players decide, well, this is where the frog people are. This is a tower filled with a necromancer
Yeah,
child
and within
king.
that example, each character set actually has an ability that says, "Hey, go ahead and you can spend a resource and define something brand new about the world, specifically one to your advantage."
Right, and I tend
Mm.
to enjoy games like that because I feel like we're part of the story, and by definition, it's stuff we care about because we wouldn't be inventing stuff we didn't care about. I tend to shy away from very lore heavy games where I feel like the game master is hitting me. Like I apologize in advance, Red. I tend to shy away from
Oh
games
boy.
like Vampire, which have thousands of pages of already built-in lore, where it turns out every historical event had vampires involved in it somehow.
Oh,
Oh gosh.
as the writer of Ironclaw, I have some very strong feelings that I can't articulate right now. Please
Oh no,
continue.
you should. You can take me. I mean, when we wrote Ironclaw, we tried to leave a lot of stuff open. We're not as
Mm,
specific about it. Like my favorite question. Okay, what year is it? Like, what year does Ironclaw take place in?
I don't know. There's a
What do
lot.
you
There's
even
a calendar. There's a
I
lot of
know.
stuff that happened.
I know what it is, but moving on before we start talking about how great my stuff is.
Hmm.
Those were a lot of what we wrote in Ironclaw supposed to be tools for the GM, where it's like, hey, something happened a long time ago that could be interpreted multiple ways. Like
Yeah.
there's like a lot of lore that's nebulous in that. Whereas most people when they come to a game, they want to see stuff. And really what we're getting at is the GM. I mean, like I wouldn't feel comfortable running a vampire game as a GM because anything I said about vampires, a player could pull out a vampire book and say that's not the actual lore.
Yeah.
This has
Oh,
definitely happened
right.
to me with franchises. Like I've run and played in Star Trek games and Star Wars games. People have strong opinions about that kind of lore.
Hmm.
And
Oh yes,
Yeah.
so
they do.
Those are
and
very concrete in a way.
but see, it's frustrating because, like we've already talked in the past, is role playing a storytelling exercise or is it a gaming exercise? And as a storytelling exercise, people who write Star Wars and Star Trek stories throw out or contradict huge sections of the lore all the time, and it still makes it
Mhm.
onto the screen,
Yeah.
and people still go to see it.
Yeah.
Right, because they're not these fans that are hyper invested in the things that they've already seen and want to see it again. They're people who have to write a new narrative.
Well, it's weird because, like,
And
someone went to go see Star Wars. Someone, went to go see The Force Awakens and all that kind of stuff. Someone went to go see the Transformers movies. Apparently, millions
some
did.
people regret it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
but they
it is interesting to compare and contrast like the Star Wars and say Vampire and Ironclaw, because I think like when it comes to Vampire and Ironclaw, you don't have to know the lore, and even if you do as a player character, you're not necessarily supposed to know everything that's going on. I don't think that there's any case where you should say, I have a vampire character here I just generated, and they happen to know the entire 20,000 long year lore of every single vampire clan in existence. They're supposed to be secret, right?
I want to tell you realistically what happens because
Mm.
when
Yeah,
people we're
realistically.
talking today about what intimidates people from being a game master. What intimidates me from being a game master is when I show up at the table and I say, okay, I need to compose something so the Malkavians have this plot here. They're going to do something. Malkavians, they only believe in chaos. They would never work together like this. And start quoting to me. I mean, using this as an example, but I mean, would start
Mhm.
quoting me something that was in a recent novel or something like that, or specific named
Mm-hmm.
characters. Now I could, like once again, GMP, I could say, well, this isn't your vampire. This isn't the game you like. This is my game.
That's the slippery slope, right?
Right. I mean, like you can pull that off, but if I mean, it's a mixed message here. If the game is lore heavy, start telling people you're going to contradict the lore. Yeah, then
Mhm.
this is what scares people away from the GM seat. If
Yeah.
somebody sat down the GM seat and the first time they did that, one out of the 4 to 6 players did that to them. The odds are pretty high they would.
Yeah.
They
Mhm.
would get told. Like I had trouble getting the Dresden Files game. I couldn't find a GM to run Dresden Files, despite the fact that like Dresden Files isn't that big. There's only like 8 to 12 novels about it.
Mhm.
And just the novels, not even the TV show. I couldn't get someone because they were too scared of rules and lore to run like something as tiny as that. And you know, whether we agree it's tiny or not, that is an obstacle for GM. That's really why if you want to get a GM to run something, I mean, that's why I'm kind of annoyed that it's creeping into D&D 5. Like the writing in D&D 5, they specifically, you know, define what tieflings and dragonborns are, and you know, like orcs are all creatures of inherent evil, and like very narrow definitions of what these things are supposed to be.
Yeah.
That it's less like, so if a GM came to this and had a different interpretation, they have to fight the rule book on it. And that kind of, not, you know, we're angry people, guys. Just watch our stream. That's what makes us GMs. We're angry and we love numbers. We are turbo nerds. We can
I
be
have
GMs.
spreadsheets.
But a thing that's scaring a lot of people away from the GM seat is not everybody's angry and not everybody knows numbers.
Yeah. I think now might be time to wheel out Dungeon World, because it is a game that I have read way more times than I have played, but it has a lot of very interesting approaches. And I think a lot of these approaches have kind of trickled down into a lot of modern game design. But just based on the last few topics that we touched on today, there is an emphasis on basically designing lore as through play, defining your
oh yeah, because Dungeon World is a Powered by the Apocalypse by the Apocalypse game. Like Apocalypse World, which was the inspiration for it, has a lot of is aggressively anti-lore is how I want to describe it. That worked very well for Apocalypse World because they keep saying it's the apocalypse, the world died, and you don't know how it happened. GMs can do anything they want, have lots of sex. So they spend almost no time at all on lore, which is a weird paradox because gamers will say where when they go to buy your game, ask where the lore is. It's like, well, games like Dungeon World Sims, you've already played D&D, you know what elves are. Which on the one hand is scary, but on the other hand, because these games are very simple and immediate, they also do something that Powered by the Apocalypse and Blades in the Dark have the players do all of the die rolling.
Yeah. Yep.
And that is an interesting idea because, first of all, it means that the players feel like they're the repository of all rules, which makes it easier to GM. But pointedly, it means that if the GM is going to screw with the player, there's no hidden rolling.
Indeed.
So there's no. I mean, I think Blades in the Dark added the fate roll, or what they call it, something like that, where the GM can just tell the players to roll some dice because they want something random to happen. But the GM or the GM rolls it in secret and doesn't tell the players. Because Blades in the Dark pointedly, like I know Wicked Ones pointedly added that. But I'd like to point out that,
just their spot rule in general too. I think, right? Just just roll 2 dice and just see did it work or did it not?
Right, but pointedly, I mean, that's an interesting idea that is in Powered by the Apocalypse in its core says that the GM never rolls anything in secret. The players are the stars. Everybody knows everything that's going on, which is an interesting style of game master.
It is. I think it takes it a step further than that too, because we were talking about, system mastery and games that sort of tell you, a lot of games tell the players what they can and can't do. The Powered by the Apocalypse games, or at the very least Dungeon World, it prescribes how the GM should play as well. It tells you, hey, based on their role, these are the kinds of things that you can do. And obviously, in many cases, you can do whatever you want. But it actually gives you a checklist of items that is going to change depending on the situation, depending on the world state and the players involved. But mostly that checklist of items are like, what do you do now? Well, you can use any of these for inspiration. These are the kinds of things that you should do. And based on the die roll, here are the kind of things that you have to do. super success, a regular success on this gather information means that the GM has to tell you one of the following pieces of information based on the situation. A critical means they have to tell you 3 of the following pieces of information. And there's something very I don't know, very fascinating to me about that notion that the GM is playing the game too. There are rules for them as well that govern what they can and cannot do.
Well, I like that you look at it as the GM is playing the game, because a lot of a novice game master mistake I see a lot is the GMs don't want to tell anybody anything, because GM was told that I'm here to challenge the player and I don't want to over volunteer information. I don't want to give them if I'm here to beat them, why would I tell them how to beat me? That goes back to our Playing the Lose podcast we just had. It's like, no. You're supposed to tell them stuff. They're idiots. They're not going to know. It's a game. They're playing this to have fun. They're howling half here. They're on their cell phone, watching kitty videos, whatever people do.
You got to put it up in neon lights for them.
And letting them, as at first I was trying to parse the Power by the Apocalypse that allows you to read any situation. What's going on here? Who's in charge here? And ask all those questions, because I kept thinking well, isn't that stuff people would know? But then I thought, no, it might be that the players would come with their own assumptions. They wouldn't think to ask these. And the GM might not know, might not frame it in that idea. And then there was, building on this was Fate's Spirit of the Century, which came up with the idea of aspects, where players are supposed to be able to, spend story points, specifically invoke the setting, like the room, it's dark, so I want to hide. This cluttered, so I want to pick up an object and hit someone with it, in ways that didn't have maps, because we're grognards, guys. We use maps. But people who were doing theater of the mind, these were tools to let the players take some of the burden away from the GM and have the players try to be creative in the environment. Because I would agree that when you have maps and you have, D&D murder hobos and rigid rules of improvised weapons don't work, here's your sword, you will get players who very much just move on the map and do the same thing over and over again. And that can feel very tedious and leave the GM in charge of wargaming, which is something I want to talk about, but I didn't cut off Griffin.
Right. Well, we could put a pin on that and come back to it later. I think there's a subject I probably do want to kind of bring up to this conversation, which is the idea of a GM-less game, where nobody is in charge whatsoever. And I can definitely see that this has happened a lot in board games, where, you have a cooperative setup between several players working against a pre-existing scenario. But those are usually pre-written and pre-set up. Even Eldritch Horror, where there's a lot of random elements, you have your one big monster, and then the effects that they have, and their deck is set up in a specific way.
So we're starting the game.
Yeah. A few of me and my friends have attempted a few times to create a GM-less dungeon crawl, because that's the easiest thing to set up. It's we'll each contribute a room, we'll contribute some ideas for encounters or traps, and then just randomly draw them off the deck and see what comes up next. And I think there's maybe something interesting maybe in this type of play, where the person who's doing the hosting is in fact just the rules themselves. And that kind of goes back to the players handling those kind of things. What do you think about setting up an entire RPG where no one is in charge?
I mean, has Red played that?
Have I played a game? I think the only. Well, no. I mean, I guess I've played Fiasco. That's a GM-less system. I've played Microscope.
There you go. And how did that go for you? What are your thoughts on it?
I enjoy it. I think I enjoy it because it creates a different sort of dynamic. When I'm playing I think when there's a GM, there's an obvious dynamic at the table where it's okay, we're the ones who are playing, you're the one who is going to shut down our ideas, or you're the one that we have to convince, right? And it creates a different dynamic. When playing a GM-less game, I kind of approach it in the case of Fiasco, I guess, I approach it like I'm GMing a game, but I just do whatever the hell I want and I go crazy. And if I can screw people over, I do without any kind of guilt. So that's the biggest difference. But it's nice to have rules.
Yeah.
Sorry?
That is the goal of Fiasco. That's why it works so well.
Yeah, that's why it works so well, right? But I think that's true. I mean, that's why I think Dungeon World, not to bring it back, I think Dungeon World telling you the kind of things that you can do is great. Maybe it's kind of like training wheels for people who have experience. But having that rules framework, like in Fiasco, and to a lesser extent in Dungeon World, does make it easier. You don't have to worry so much about whether or not the thing you're doing is right or is legal. You can kind of just lean on the rules to take that weight off your mind. And that can make for a very fun game. So I'm for it. I haven't played a game as in-depth as or simulationist as something like a D&D that was GM-less. I know that Descent and Gloomhaven are very popular, but also the combat is usually when I tune out of games like D&D, and so I'm afraid that I would just tune out of those games as well.
Yeah, I
Right.
think we would need to clarify that there are GM-less games where it's you versus a structure. Like,
Yeah.
Eldritch
Yeah.
Horror is you versus the board game. There are also those fighting fantasy books or lone wolf, adventure books that, in the 80s, there was a thriving solo where you pull up the book and you go from program to counter. But once again, there might be no game master here, but it's you versus a structure. We're back in a computer game. You wouldn't describe
Right.
Horizon Zero Dawn as a GM-less game. The computer is taking on the role of moderating your activity. And
Right.
just like that, you run into a problem where they'll always, a big selling point that's described with role-playing games is how it's theater of the mind and it's your imagination. That you're not beholden to just the rules that are in the book. You can go off book and do new behavior or do things that were unexpected and strange, more so than the way any computer or book or board game could have predicted.
Right.
And there is GM-less role play in that regard. Usually you'll see that a lot in LARPs or on online forums. Role play, mostly because it's easier to be able to get together, and because especially online forums are anonymous, people will feel bolder to do certain things. And the rules are supposed to exist to moderate play in between people. Those can be very frustrating though, because really, like, the purpose of the role-playing game is to tell you when you lose or when you can't do something. Because a good example is, I don't know if kids still play Cops and Robbers, I'm so old. But if you said, bang, you're dead, and the other person says, no, I'm not, you don't have a way to arbitrate that. You can't do anything to anyone unless they consent to having it done to them. And few people consent to losing. So you could put some role-playing game metric in the way that's some way to arbitrate it, like rock, paper, scissors, or cards or dice, to go ahead and have, if we have a dispute, we can go ahead and put it to those cards. But of course, that means we have to have the way the dispute is framed in terms of that. That can work, but then you run into the other problem of nothing happens unless someone incites to do it. Like if you're in a GM-less game, you don't have adventures unless something happens. Like you said, well, what if I draw cards, or what if I and those are good ideas, but once again, you brought in something to master the game for you. You brought in a third-party resource to form you with ideas. There might be no GM that tells us what we can and cannot do as players. We might be fighting a neutral context, and you can have players who get into that. There's some good games like that. But it will be a different experience. It's not going to be, it's going to be a lot of us standing around and talking about what we would do, and a lot of improv. It'd be, I guess, paradoxically, a lot like some of the streams that you see. It's very challenging because you would have to have some sort of resource that you're pulling from, and it's not going to have as much dynamics. Like, you can't have what I described earlier in our Playing to Lose. You don't have villains responding, because you'd be drawing random cards of random events. So either we would have to decide how the villains do it, in which case the villains aren't plotting in secret. We know what they're doing.
Right.
Or there's something that is a book or something like that that would have it happen. So, I mean, it's kind of a sliding scale. You could have it rules light, and there's technically no game master. But at some point, if you don't have something from without, something that's not us, imposing some sort of structure that we can't predict or know or decide, you run the risk of the game becoming very stagnant. It's just a bunch of people standing around talking about how cool they are.
Yeah. I guess I can see that. I think minimizing the external forces, if the game focuses on the interactions of the players at the table, it's probably going to be more successful GM-less, because the more that what you said, Rafferty, the more that the external forces have to be represented and no one at the table is taking responsibility for them, the more difficult that is going to be.
Well, it's yes, more successful, but also this usually works better short term. I mentioned Fiasco really encourages you to screw over the other players. That's not a campaign.
Yeah, right.
And that's the problem you're running into, that if you have characters that you want to level up, that's why players versus environment or players versus NPCs is the primary in gaming, because we can whoop those guys all we want and then we level up and feel better about ourselves. If it's a game where we're constantly fighting each other, we can run into the problem of where some people are going to lose or their characters are going to be destroyed. That's fine if it's short term like Fiasco, where we expect everybody to die, or Paranoia, which is a role playing game about, trying to screw one another over and not get caught. But if you're trying, when you start getting into the vampire territory, which is very popular with LARPing and stuff, now we're running into problems because Vampire clearly has leveling up mechanisms.
Yeah. I wonder too I guess if we're defining like modern role playing, or the role playing that we're talking about, as these very dynamic experiences where people have a lot of external forces to like react against. Part of what makes role-playing games so good is having that human element of GMing that is kind of, running things. So it's a difficult one to get around. Although you see a lot of push for automation even in these popular games where you get random tables, you get a lot of like, hey, roll to see what happens next is a big part of emergent gameplay design.
That goes back to like the 70s and 80s. They had random encounter tables and random treasure tables. They still do.
Right? If you just said, hey, instead of the guy over there making these random wandering monster rolls, what if we just took turns doing it around the table and then we see what happens?
Right. And here's where we're getting into something, which is the GM is technically a curator. All of the advice is going to tell you, like when we say the GM can change dice or ignore rules when they want to, that's curated. So it's supposed to be that when the GM rolls something random and the random result isn't appropriate or is semi-appropriate, needs to be tweaked, the GM is allowed to change it. Like one of my big ones was when we were playing the Demon Web quest, which starts off where we walk along the road from one major city to another major city, and the GM rolls some dice and says, "You are ambushed by 80 ogres." And then he paused and said, "But 70 of them leave in disgust because this is stupid." Because the idea that, remember, major city, another major city on a highly traveled road, why are there 80 ogres here? Like it was that was too ridiculous. And also, this will take us all day. Whereas 10 ogres, he could have just said there were 10 ogres, but if he went by the random roll, it would have been 80. And that's what
that's pretty goofy.
We still had a tough time defeating 10 ogres, and 10 ogre bandits made a lot more sense of how, they weren't getting immediately caught or killed by the giants who live here. Come on, let's be serious. But that's what I'm getting, like, curated. That's that got lost. Like we talked about this before, in our previous podcast. Like a lot of people will tell you advice like you're not supposed to run the Tomb of Horrors as written. You're supposed to make changes to it as a GM to go ahead and curate it. And that's what's starting to get annoying about trying to get a new GM. GMs are somehow supposed to be able to read the room, to know how the game works and how it doesn't, and how to fix it to make sure it runs faster and on time. And all three things I just said, I have had people fight me on that.
There's like a lot of simultaneous judgment calls you have to do there, where you have to literally become a designer for half a moment while also storytelling, while also entertaining your local friends, and also order them pizza at the same time. It's a lot of things to juggle in the same moment.
Right. That's why I'm kind of glad that we're seeing Critical Role and that kind of stuff, because those guys are applying theater and storytelling techniques to the game. Like I've always argued that the game, the game stalls because the GM didn't make it happen. The GM can always make it happen. People are fond of telling you two guys just burst in the door with guns. The GM can declare, "Hey, you guys waited too long and the world was destroyed. Screw you." The GM can make stuff happen faster, but I've met a lot of GM, novice, even experienced ones, who just get frustrated or seize up because they're thinking of all the things that could be happening, of provisions and die rolls and mechanisms in their heads, and the action just grinds to a halt, and players get bored or frustrated because nothing's happening, and they're not reading like, in other words, not understanding it. And that's a skill set that I think the game is fighting people on it, because once again, you pick up D&D and there's 90% of the rule book is about how orcs are evil, and here's their challenge rating, and here's the extra legendary actions Beholder gets. By the way, you should be a good GM.
I've heard a lot of
do well, stupid. Obviously,
I've heard a lot of a lot of attacks levied against the modern 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. I don't think that they're unwarranted. When I look at it, I think it's definitely, it feels to me like it's being written to an audience that already has some experience doing this, and I think that's a failure, honestly, when you're trying to create something that's accessible for new audiences. So I'm with them on that.
Around for like 3rd edition, like D&D 2nd edition has that problem too. But in 3rd edition, every time they introduced a rule, they would have a sentence after say, like, people who lose the initiative are caught flat-footed. Period. Next sentence: being flat-footed denies you your dex bonus to your AC. Period. They would do that every single time because they knew you didn't know this. And then they had behind the curtain circumstances where they would say, okay, as a GM, if you do this, then this will happen. That might, if you increase the combat encounters, that might happen. Or if you have the more time you roll randomly, randomness rewards the NPCs because they only have to win once. They're the underdogs in this. So if you do this, then this will happen. And they talk to you smartly about, if you make these choices, this happens. It's one of the great chapters of GMing advice. And you're right. I think a lot of it is, that's why I'm always against blame your GM. I mean, because I guess related to this, like what I say about wargaming is, like, one of the things we're struggling with is what we intend the games to be and whatnot. Like, you've heard me complain that, like, Iron Claw was conceived as a game where you should be able to fight 20-1 odds. But the problem we keep running into is, we as designer did not write the game accessible enough for many GMs to do that. I mean, we thought we put text in there. I can point where it is, but people aren't reading it, and they aren't grokking it, and most importantly, they're not doing it. And that's an onus on us. Now we're working on Vital Hearts, which will come out. And with Vital Hearts, we're trying to put wording in here of, we really, really want you to do 20-1 odds or 30-1 odds. And we don't want GMs to get scared that that's too many mobiles on the table, that's too much, we can't do that. Or my turn's going to take an hour and a half, and because my turn took an hour and a half the first time, the players got bored. I can never do this again. Let's go back to only mini-boss. So we're putting rules in there of narrowing down what NPC choices are, narrowing it down. Like, that really gets into me of, like, what we do to help GMs lower the complexity. Like D&D 4 had that beautiful thing where they had minions. They had guys who had 1 hit point. And they got rid of that, and there's lots of GMs who just wing it. Like, old GMs who just, I just lie about how many hit points they have. The players don't know. But novice GMs, might not understand that, and players might yell at them about that. I'm the kind of player who yells at GM, where I know you just hand waved over my victory to make it not work, and that makes me scary as a player. And it's kind of like, people could say, well, GM can do whatever they want, you're a bad player, then I leave the game. And it's kind of like, what, this could have been solved if we write the games closer to make them GM friendly. If we wrote it more like Apocalypse World or Dungeon World, where, well, let's just simplify the rules so we're not even going to have this argument. Let's just write it the way people are going to play it.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of onboarding GMs, that's definitely something we've kind of hit on here. Red, if you had to go ahead and give some advice to say, hey, you're going to run, here's how to do it. What do you think would be the kind of first thing you would suggest people do or try to do to get into this and make it easier for themselves?
Well, I think I don't know if this is the best advice. This is the advice that I have started to internalize for myself. It is that if you, and it's maybe like cramming for a test, right? But if you have way more rules than you are going to learn before your session 1, before you have to start running this game, I would highly recommend focusing on the player character sheets before anything else. Because if you think about it, really, your players are experiencing the game world through their characters. Their characters' abilities and limitations are what they know of the game. And it's a good idea that you know them too. I think it's often tempting to look at a rule book and say like, oh, I got to get to the section on blood bonding, for example, in Vampire, or some sort of like esoteric system without ever realizing that your players are going to be employing and expecting their powers to work and to be meaningful in the game. If you didn't hit on the section where they talk about this particular character's power of perception or of like foresight or prophecy, they're going to be sitting there expecting that their character is going to have like crazy visions, and you will be left caught flat-footed, to steal a phrase from older versions of D&D. So that would be my off the top of the head advice. Too often I've realized when starting games that I didn't start with the player character rules, and often I would go back and say like, I had all of these opportunities to draw my players in through their characters and incorporate abilities that only they could do that made them special. And I didn't, because I was just completely oblivious to the fact that they had those abilities to start with. So that's my advice. Start with the character sheets.
Yeah, there you go. What do you think, Rafferty? Since people do still have to play the games that are here, what advice would you throw out at them right now?
I mean, I like that advice. I'm gonna try and I'm also worried with the GM as a novice GM who like may have played the game once or twice, or in theory, someone had to be the first GM.
Right.
Yes.
The first one is something that you may have noticed we put in our game, which is debriefings. There's this weird thing of where there's a taboo about asking the players what they actually want to do. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Right. So that's why the goal was in games like Ironclaw, where you say, okay, what's your starting goal? What do you want to do? Just ask them. And that's why, you started with asking them what they wanted to do the first time. And that's why there's a debriefing, after the game. But if it's your first session before the game, just ask the player what it is they want to do. If they don't know, skip them. And if they do know, a lot of players will say like, hey, I'm here because I wanted to fight with guns akimbo. I brought that. That's what I want to do. Many players will be honest about it. Some of them, whatever. That's the first thing you can ask. Now you know. So when it happens in the game, you're not surprised. That's what we mean by build up. Ask the players what they want to do. Don't be scared. It's this, like I said, it's this weird thing where the game sets off where the GM is considered to be on some kind of throne and just tells the players what's happening. Now, games like Vampire help you because you can guess that what a Bruja wants to do is different from what a Malkavian wants to do. You know what those are. But, that helps you a little bit. Just ask your players. I'm going to go back to the two other things I mentioned before here and in previous. The other one is I can imagine trying to read the character sheet, but if it's a D&D character sheet with 4-point type, you were going to miss the fact that I wrote down I've got crossbows akimbo on. So my advice is when a rule situation comes up, flip it around. Like if you don't know the rules, like if the players say we want to sneak into the place, just flip it around and ask, okay, what abilities do you have to do this? Some players might not have the abilities at all. But a player who came today to be a ninja and says, "Oh boy, do I have stealth up the wazoo," is going to tell you. And that way you've solved that problem of knowing what it is they want. The other one is, like I said in the previous podcast, you're playing to lose. So if you're coming up with your own scenarios in the game, okay, then assume that the players have the abilities to overcome it. And then how would your villains or monsters or whatever react after they got theirs handed? Like after they were defeated. So when you put a challenge in front of them, I find that's pretty good GM advice, because players, like if you ask, tell them, okay, here's the fortress, how do you get in? And then the players succeed on getting in. What do the villains do? You ask yourself when you're planning the adventure in the scenario, what would the villains do after they got in the fortress? What would the villains do after they killed the boss? What would happen after the players succeeded? A lot of pre-written adventures are written like that. But I mean, like after the players win, but don't assume they're going to win in a specific way. Like they might negotiate, they might do bribery, they might do something else. That's why I say be in that mindset of you're running a bunch of NPCs who are about to get destroyed. You don't know how they're going to get destroyed, but you do. And that's why I say have that kind of attitude, because I've often seen the flip side attitude where the GM is inflexible or railroading. Like it's written, I've seen scenarios in the books where it's written that the villains will just win. Where the villains will show up, get into a fight, win the fight, and then walk away.
You see, I already won 42 minutes ago.
Yeah, or the villain shows up, attacks all of you, and then flees. That always drives me nuts, because it's like, what do you mean we can't catch them? We have rangers. We have monks. You gave us the abilities to follow people.
I have the
I cast
fast-moving
Expeditious
gift.
Retreat.
Yeah. Expeditious Pursuit.
Right, or hold person, for crying out loud.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, so you have to learn. The novice GM is you have to learn to roll with that. If you immediately start railroading your players, some of your players will get frustrated and leave. I know I would. And then the players who will hang around are going to suddenly become obsessed with combat. And then your game is going to become nothing but either grognardia or performative. And which, if it becomes all combat, that can be, you might get bored as a GM. There's no emergence going on, and the scenarios always play out exactly the same way. We already mentioned, as a GM, you're going to get bored. So that's why I always encourage GMs, plan to lose, but lose in fun and creative ways. You're here to be the big loser and watch other characters who aren't yours get totally trashed and humiliated. So, revel in the masochism of that and roll with that. And if that should be the attitude you take, and not the attitude of I need to kill the PC.
I think that's definitely strong.
I think that's really good. So we definitely covered a lot of the improvisational tools that you kind of need, and a lot of the foreplanning when it comes to NPCs, how the world works, and how to set that up. I think when it comes to judgment calls, I think it's probably very good to maybe focus on the consequences of what kind of call you're making and try to figure out which side is going to be more fun now and what will be more fun later on. Because obviously, if you set down a rule and it's like, oh, well, now every enemy is just going to kite because that's kind of the ruling that's been set down, it's like, that's not going to be fun for anyone in the future. So I think focusing on that and then working backward from what you want towards how to make it happen is usually the better way to work. And usually that's bad logic to start from a conclusion and then build an excuse for how it happens, but you're better at that than you think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I think there's a theme emerging here, which is that you need to prepare for failure, right? Or you need to prepare for that, there's there is a good degree of guesswork that goes into it. You need to stay flexible, but you also want to have something prepared for the most likely outcome, and maybe a little bit less prepared for the unlikely outcome, but still keep it in mind. It's a very difficult thing, and I think a lot of this comes from me trying to express years of experience. I think for all of us, probably years of experience to people who maybe have no experience, and articulating that can be very difficult because it depends on firsthand experience or familiarity with these concepts.
Right.
But
We haven't quite wrote a
yeah.
book about it yet ourselves.
Yeah,
We'll
not
get to
yet.
that, I'm sure.
Well,
Maybe
okay.
one of us.
I've only written
Yeah,
like 7.
there you go. But I do think, yeah, thinking about it in terms of presenting obstacles, don't concern yourself so much with solutions because when you play these games, you realize that like life finds a way. Your players will come up with a solution, and as long as you are not too rigid in your interpretation, that solution will lead to more interesting situations. So, yeah, think
Yeah,
about
you should open
obstacles, think
yourself
about
up to being
challenges.
surprised for sure.
Yeah. I mean, this gets back
Exactly.
to our previous podcast of kill your darling.
Yeah.
A lot there's advice every book has, but it's not very good. They say that the GM's word is law and that the GM has fiat. So you're supposed to change or break the rules when it makes the game more fun. Period. New paragraph. What does that mean? And a couple things that means is, first of all, it makes the game more fun. First of all, it makes the game go faster. If you've got like a lot of rules in there on how to repair the broken boat or reprovision stuff, or basically a bunch of stuff, how to recover your hit points over time, and everyone at the table is bored and wants to get on with it, that's when you hand wave over them.
Yeah.
Also, this is the thing I was warned about killing your darlings from the previous podcast. You cheat to make the game more fun. It's not fun to lose. So you cheat to help the players win. And the best time is when you're actually cheating. You want to be able to tweak the rules in ways players can't pick up on, which can be very difficult if you don't know the rules and they know the rules better than you. But if you're cheating in the rules, it's almost always better to cheat to let the players win. Because if you cheat to make a player lose, they'll become confused. They'll say, I thought this was going to work and it didn't. And they'll pick up on that. And if you don't know the rules very well, they'll pick up on it before you do.
Oh yeah.
So, I know there's a lot of talk about rules lawyering where players will cheat when it's in their favor and not when they're not. But you're the GM, you can cheat whenever you want. And the goal is your goal is to be fair, build up, have fun. So even though you have the power to hand wave over things and to edit rules and get those out, ask yourself, how does this make it more fun for my player? Yes, you as the GM are also supposed to have fun. I've had people argue before the GM needs to have, and they're right. But if the players aren't having fun, you're the one with the omnipotent storytelling. If you want to have fun and not have to listen to anyone, go write a book.
Exactly. Oh. Yeah. I'm sorry. That should be, I mean, it shouldn't be a podcast topic because it would literally just be us reiterating the same thing over and over. But yeah. Role-playing games are not linear stories. They're not prescribed or deterministic,
And also, well, I mean, I don't think that this gets into performative where I would argue that many of the ones that you see streamed online are like that. And railroading might necessarily, but stopping your players from doing what they want to do is not fun. Many players will be happy with a railroaded adventure as long as they get to express themselves and be a cool, sexy Malkavian cobbled or whatever. If they're having fun being that, they might not care about the narrative flow as long as they can role play, and that's fine. I mean, the trick here is the GM is supposed, like we already talked about, let your players bring it out. That's also why I emphasize the debriefing. If players catch you cheating or something like that, or have questions about why you change certain rules a certain way, you can discuss it and learn. And that's why I love to have games where we have a structured debriefing. That way, if you want to keep the game going, you're a little worried, you can say, look, I know this is weird now, but let's make time to discuss it later, and then pointedly make time to discuss it later and have an open dialogue. You're all here to have fun.
I would say that's probably a universal social style of medicine is communication in almost every situation will improve things for you. So I'm a big fan of the debrief. I think that's actually really good. Having constant communication with your players is a good thing.
Absolutely.
Case.
Communication and understanding. We're seeing a lot of discourse here where people are saying, why would someone want to do that? It's kind of like, look, if they're at your table and they came to play your game, you have a choice to make. You either do it the way they, do it in a way that makes them have fun or not, and then ask them to leave. You're not going to do it in a way that makes them have fun. If you can't communicate and come to an understanding, they can't be at your gaming table. And if you're a game designer, well, just tell people don't buy your game. No one wants to, that's kettle of fish. And no one wants to say that. Don't buy D&D.
So, I suppose let's go ahead and move into some concluding remarks then there. So, Red, what do you have to go ahead and end things off on?
Yeah, you had to. I had something too, and I'm desperately trying to remember what it was.
Oh, no.
Does Raph want to go first this time? I feel like I always lead it off.
I'll go really quickly. Your players are more afraid of you than you are of them.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
As GM, you have infinite bad guys, infinite resources, up to and including you're allowed to cheat. That's why my advice is, the players are intimidated and scared by that. They've got the one character that you can kill at any time. So regardless of the game, listen to your players. And like I always say, like improv and building up always works. When something happens in the game, you don't necessarily know the rules, ask them. And if they cheat the first time, who cares? Go read the rules. Once again, no one cares about cheating. I'm watching all of these streams and people are doing everything wrong. And it's driving me nuts, but everybody likes to watch it. So they're all having fun. That's the future. Fun.
Yeah, and I think I probably have to reiterate what you said there a little bit, Raph, where the reason that you're all here, that you are hanging out with your friends, is to have fun. And if you're not having a fun experience, you're in control of that. Make a decision to let them have more fun. Just let them do it. It's fine. No one's going to lower your D&D score over it.
Well, I might, but who cares?
Yeah, the Rafferty scoreboard is lower than everyone else's.
Yeah. I'm just gonna piggyback off of what you guys said because I think it's all great advice. I was thinking about what I think maybe the defining feature between like a newbie GM and an experienced GM is. I think what it boils down to is that you are creating, in both cases, you are creating obstacles, you're creating challenges and situations. And I think when you're creating those situations and you know that regardless of what the players choose, the outcome will be exciting and interesting, that's when you know you've graduated. So that's the goal. Think about framing things, use all of the tools that Rafferty and Griff just pointed out, and work on it. And with experience, you'll start to know what is going to lead to more fun and more interesting and intriguing situations. So that's my intermediate GM advice, I guess.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to go ahead and conclude it for this episode of Notes from the Aleph. We stream episodes bi-weekly Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can come join us live at Twitch at twitch.tv/Ractus. We also stream and record weekly tabletop games at the same channel. You can come join us when we start at 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sundays and Wednesdays. Norman Rafferty here is partner and writer for Sanguine Games. Check out sanguinegames.com and join us on the Reddit and Twitter, and look forward to the upcoming Book of Quarrels Ironclaw expansion book, where you can have your own pirate adventures. And don't forget to check out RedRabbit and book him for a game over on startplayinggames.com as RedRabbit. And be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and come see us all again. So until next time.